Right. So today we are diving into some pretty choppy waters,
Yeah.
diplomatically speaking, at least.
Yeah.
We are, of course, talking about President Zelensky's visit to the Oval Office just last week.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be a meeting about the ongoing war in Ukraine, but things went a little bit sideways.
Yeah.
So we've got video clips from the meeting itself, and we've got some expert analysis and global reaction.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, I think, to see how quickly like a routine diplomatic meeting can turn into such a public and tense confrontation.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a disagreement behind closed doors. This was for the whole world to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think things really started heating up when Vice President Vance accused Zelenskyy of forcing conscripts to the front lines because of manpower problems.
Right.
He even went on to suggest that Zelenskyy should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to the conflict.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand that this kind of public rebuke, especially from the vice president, is such a huge departure from typical diplomatic norms.
Yeah.
It's incredibly rare for U.S. officials to criticize an ally so openly.
Especially one that's actively fighting a war.
Exactly. And this was a very clear signal, I think, that the Trump administration is taking a very different approach to the conflict.
Yeah.
Potentially to its foreign policy as a whole.
And then President Trump himself stepped in, and that's when things really, I think, went off the rails a little bit.
Yeah.
He told Zelenskyy, you're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling with World War III.
Wow.
Strong words.
It's very striking, the language that he uses here.
Yeah.
This isn't really the kind of measured diplomatic language that you would expect in this situation. It's like he's at a poker table,
Right.
not in the Oval Office with a world leader facing an existential threat.
Yeah.
It feels like he's trying to intimidate Zelenskyy, which again is a huge break from diplomatic protocol.
Zelenskyy didn't back down, though.
No, he didn't.
He responded with a very simple but powerful, I am not playing cards.
Which I think really underscores the gravity of the situation.
Yeah.
Zelenskyy isn't playing games.
Yeah.
He's facing a brutal invasion. His country is at war, and he's not going to be bullied into making concessions that jeopardize Ukraine's future.
So we have this explosive exchange in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, this wasn't just some private spat between leaders. This was a very public spectacle.
Yeah.
And the international community was watching.
They were.
The fallout was immediate. It was widespread. We saw condemnation pouring in from world leaders, particularly in Europe.
Yeah. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas issued a pretty scathing statement.
Yeah.
She said that the free world needs a new leader. We stand by Ukraine.
And this is where things get really interesting, because Kallas isn't just criticizing Trump's behavior. She's directly challenging America's leadership role. In the world, I mean, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
The EU's top diplomat is essentially saying that the U.S. can no longer be trusted to lead the free world.
Right.
And this is coming from a close ally.
Yeah.
A partner that the U.S. has relied on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
This is a huge shift in the global landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she wasn't alone, Ursula von der Leyen,
Oh, yeah.
the president of the European Commission.
Mm-hmm.
She tweeted directly to Zelenskyy.
Yeah.
She said, "Your dignity honors the bravery of the Ukrainian people.
Wow.
Be strong, be brave, be fearless.
Yeah.
You are never alone."
So even the typically more reserved EU leaders
Right.
are coming out with these really strong rebukes of the U.S. president and offering unwavering support for Zelenskyy.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that tell us about the global response to this?
Well, it tells us that this isn't just a blip on the radar.
Right.
This incident has really rattled the international community.
Yeah.
Traditional U.S. allies are really starting to question America's commitment
Yeah.
to its partners and its role as a global leader.
Right.
There's a real sense that this could be a turning point in international relations, a shift away from a U.S.-led world order.
And how did President Trump react to this wave of global criticism?
Well, he doubled down.
Okay.
Instead of trying to smooth things over or clarify his position,
Right.
he took to social media and accused Zelenskyy of not being ready for peace
Okay.
and disrespecting the United States.
Okay.
He said he can come back when he's ready for peace.
So not backing down at all.
Not at all.
It doesn't really sound like he's interested in mending any fences.
This is classic Trump,
Right.
confrontational, defiant, and seemingly unconcerned with the diplomatic fallout.
Yeah.
But this isn't just about style. This is about substance.
Yep.
This statement suggests a really fundamental shift in U.S. policy towards the war in Ukraine.
You mentioned earlier that this kind of public confrontation with an ally is highly unusual. Can you maybe give us a little bit of historical context here?
Yeah.
How does this compare to past U.S. foreign policy?
Sure, yeah. For decades, the U.S. has been a really staunch supporter of Ukraine, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And this support was formalized in the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994.
Right.
This was a treaty where the U.S., along with Russia and the U.K.,
Yep.
pledged to respect Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity
Right.
in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons.
So essentially, the U.S. made a promise to protect Ukraine's sovereignty.
Exactly.
And now with these actions and rhetoric, it seems like Trump is going back on that promise.
That's the perception, and perception matters a great deal in international relations.
Absolutely.
If the U.S. is seen as unreliable,
Right.
as a country that breaks its promises,
Yeah.
that has really serious implications for its credibility and its ability to lead.
Right.
This isn't just about Ukraine. This is about the entire global order. The system of alliances and partnerships that the U.S. has built over decades.
And to your point about the U.S. breaking its promises, didn't the Biden administration pledge billions of dollars in aid
Exactly.
to Ukraine?
The Biden administration, along with many European countries, pledged massive military and economic aid
Yeah.
to help Ukraine resist the Russian invasion. But Trump's recent actions and statements seem to contradict this commitment.
Totally.
He's essentially saying that the U.S. is no longer interested in supporting Ukraine's fight for survival.
So we've got this dramatic confrontation in the Oval Office,
Right.
global condemnation of Trump's behavior, and now this apparent shift in U.S. policy towards Ukraine.
Yeah.
What does this all mean for the war itself?
Right.
What are the potential consequences on the ground?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The implications are potentially vast. Ukraine is heavily reliant on Western, particularly American support
Right.
to counter Russia's military might.
Yeah.
If that support dries up,
Right.
it becomes unreliable.
Yeah.
It could have a devastating impact
Mm-hmm.
on Ukraine's ability to defend itself. And if Ukraine starts losing ground, wouldn't that embolden Putin?
Absolutely.
Perhaps even encourage him to escalate the conflict?
It would send a message that the West is divided,
Yeah,
that its support for Ukraine is wavering,
right.
and that Putin can act with impunity.
Mm-hmm.
It could even embolden him to push further,
Right.
maybe even into NATO territory,
Yeah.
triggering a wider conflict.
So we're not just talking about the fate of Ukraine here.
Oh.
We're talking about the potential for a major escalation
Right.
of the war.
Yeah.
A war that could potentially drag NATO into a direct conflict with Russia.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
This isn't just a regional conflict anyway.
Yes.
This has the potential to spiral into a global crisis,
Yeah.
a conflict with consequences that could reverberate for decades.
And on top of that, you mentioned earlier that this situation could embolden other autocratic leaders around the world.
What did you mean by that?
Well, if the U.S., the self-proclaimed leader of the free world,
Right.
is seen as abandoning its allies and backing away from its commitments,
Yeah.
it sends a very dangerous signal to autocratic leaders like
Yeah.
Xi Jinping in China.
Right.
It tells them that they can act aggressively,
Yeah.
that they can bully their neighbors and threaten democracies without facing serious consequences.
It's almost like we're talking about a domino effect. If Ukraine falls, who's next? Taiwan.
That's the fear.
Right.
Many analysts believe that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
it will embolden China to take a more aggressive stance towards Taiwan.
Right.
And remember, Taiwan is a crucial player in the global economy,
Yeah.
a major producer of semiconductors that are essential for everything,
Right.
from smartphones to cars.
Mm-hmm.
A conflict over Taiwan could have devastating consequences for the global economy and could easily escalate into a wider conflict.
So we're talking about potential cascading crises here.
Yeah.
A war in Ukraine could lead to a conflict over Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
which could then trigger a global economic meltdown and
Right.
potentially even a wider war.
Exactly.
It's pretty overwhelming to think about.
It is, but it's important to face these realities.
Yeah.
This isn't about fear-mongering.
Right.
It's about understanding the stakes.
Yeah.
The world is at a crossroads. The actions of leaders like Trump have the potential to unravel the international order.
Right.
this system of rules and norms that has kept the peace for decades, we're potentially entering a new era,
Yeah.
a more dangerous and unpredictable era where might makes right, and where democracies are increasingly under threat.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential consequences for the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The risk of a wider conflict, the emboldening of autocratic leaders.
Right.
What about the impact on the U.S. itself? What does this mean for America's standing in the world?
Well, as we've seen, the U.S. is already facing a serious credibility crisis.
Yeah.
Its allies are questioning its reliability. Its enemies are sensing weakness.
Right.
And its global leadership is being challenged.
And you said earlier that this was causing a shift in the global balance of power.
Yeah.
What does it actually look like?
Well, it means that the world is moving away from a unipolar system dominated by the U.S.
Right.
towards a more multipolar world where power is more diffuse.
Okay.
We're seeing the rise of new centers of power, like China and the EU, who are increasingly willing to challenge U.S. dominance and assert their own interests.
So if the U.S. continues down this path, if it continues to alienate its allies and undermine its own credibility, what does that mean for its future role in the world?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's clear that the U.S. is at a turning point. If it wants to maintain its position as a global leader, it needs to rebuild trust with its allies, reaffirm its commitment to democratic values, and demonstrate that it's still capable of leading on the world stage.
Do you think that's possible, given the current political climate in the U.S.?
It's certainly a challenge, but I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Okay.
There are still many people within the U.S. government, within the foreign policy establishment, and within the public who understand the importance of American leadership and who are committed to working with allies to address global challenges.
Earlier, we talked about the Budapest Memorandum and how the U.S. pledged to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. How does this recent incident with Zelenskyy affect the future of that agreement?
Well, it certainly doesn't inspire confidence. If the U.S. is willing to publicly humiliate and threaten its allies, it raises serious questions about its commitment to upholding its treaty obligations. This could have a chilling effect on future arms control agreements and security guarantees, making it harder to build trust and cooperation between nations.
You know, I'm reminded of something that former U.S. Ambassador Winston Lord said about this whole debacle. He argued that Trump has done more damage to America's global standing in a month than decades of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan combined.
That's a pretty heavy statement.
It is.
But it reflects, I think, a deep sense of alarm among many foreign policy experts. They see Trump's actions as not just misguided, but reckless and potentially catastrophic. They fear that he's undermining the very foundations of the international order, the system of alliances and partnerships that has kept the peace for decades.
This whole situation with Zelenskyy is incredibly complex. With so many potential ramifications for Ukraine, for the U.S., and for the world. It's easy to get caught up in the immediate drama. But what I keep coming back to is the long-term impact, the ripple effects that could be felt for generations.
And that's where this deep dive becomes so important. We need to look beyond the headlines, beyond the sensationalism, and really grapple with the complex questions at the heart of this issue. What does it mean for the future of democracy, for global security, for the very idea of international cooperation?
We're not just talking about a diplomatic spat here. We're talking about the potential unraveling of the global order as we know it.
We're at a crossroads. And the choices we make now will have profound consequences for the future. This isn't just about presidents and prime ministers. This is about all of us. We all have a stake in the future of the world. And we all have a responsibility to engage with these issues.
Absolutely.
To understand the stakes and to make our voices heard.
It can feel a little overwhelming, right? All this talk about like power shifts and potential conflicts. I mean, where do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Well, it is a lot to process for sure, but I think that's why these deep dives are so important. You know, we need to push past the headlines, the sound bites, and really grapple with the complexity of the situation.
Okay, so let's try to like break this down a little bit. We've talked about how this situation with Zelenskyy could impact the war in Ukraine embolden other autocratic leaders.
Yeah.
Even trigger like a wider global conflict. But what about the everyday person? Like, what does this mean for someone who's not a diplomat or a politician?
That's a great question. And the truth is, even if you're not directly involved in foreign policy, this stuff matters.
It does.
It matters because the decisions made by our leaders have a real ripple effect on all of us.
Yeah.
They impact our economy,
right,
our security, even our personal freedoms.
So what can the average person do?
Yeah.
It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these like massive global forces.
I understand that feeling, but I think it's important to remember that we're not completely powerless.
Okay.
We live in democracies, and that means we have a voice. We can hold our leaders accountable. We can demand that they act responsibly.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, the first step is to stay informed, like you're doing right now.
Right.
By listening to this deep dive. Educate yourself about the issues. Read different perspectives.
Yeah.
Don't just get your news from one source.
Right. It's so easy to just get caught up in our echo chamber.
Exactly.
We're surrounded by people who already agree with us.
Yeah, and challenge your own assumptions. Don't underestimate the power of your own voice.
Right.
You can contact your elected officials, advocate for policies that align with your values, and support organizations that are working to promote peace and understanding.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like our individual actions don't really make a difference.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Even small actions can have a ripple effect, you know.
Absolutely.
By engaging in our communities, by supporting responsible journalism, by promoting critical thinking, we can contribute to a more informed and engaged citizenry.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what it's all about.
Right.
Building a more informed, engaged, and active citizenry.
Yeah.
Because remember, the future's not predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make every single day.
Right.
And by choosing to be informed, by choosing to be engaged, by choosing to be active, we can help steer the world towards a more just and peaceful future.
You know, this whole conversation's been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of the complexity and the fragility of the world we live in.
It is.
But it's also a call to action.
Yeah.
An invitation to be more than just passive observers.
I couldn't agree more. We have the power to shape the future.
Yeah.
But it requires us to be informed, engaged, and committed to building a better world. The stakes are high.
Yeah.
But the potential rewards are even greater.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a question for you, our listener. If America's global credibility is eroding, as we've discussed today, what does that mean for the future of international relations? What does it mean for the future of global stability? It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
A question that will likely shape the years to come. And it's a question that we each have a role in answering.
Yeah.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to make a difference. Until next time, keep diving deep.